The systematic provision of learning techniques to most children, such as literacy, has been a development of the last 150 or 200 years, or even last 50 years in some countries. Schools for the young have historically been supplemented with advanced training for priests, bureaucrats and specialists. Education in ancient civilization. The development of writing starting in about 3500 BC, various writing systems developed in ancient civilizations around the world. In Egypt, fully developed hieroglyphs were in use at Abydos as early as 3400 BC. Later, the world's oldest known alphabet was developed in Central Egypt around 2000 BC. From a hieroglyphic prototype, one hieroglyphic script was used on stone monuments. Other cursive scripts were used for writing in ink on papyrus, a flexible, paper-like material, made from the stems of reeds that grow in marshes and beside rivers such as the River Nile. The Phoenician writing system was adapted from the Proto-Canaanite script in around the 11th century BC, which in turn borrowed ideas from Egyptian hieroglyphics. This script was adapted by the Greeks. A variant of the early Greek alphabet gave rise to the Etruscan alphabet, and its own descendants, such as the Latin alphabet. Other descendants from the Greek alphabet include the Cyrillic script, used to write Russian, among others. The Phoenician system was also adapted into the Aramaic script, from which the Hebrew script and also that of Arabic are descended. In China, the early oracle bone script has survived on tens of thousands of oracle bones dating from around 1400 to 1200 BC. In the Shang dynasty, out of more than 2,500 written characters in use in China in about 1200 BC, as many as 1,400 are identifiable as the source of later Standard Chinese characters. Of several pre-Columbian scripts in Mesoamerica, the one that appears to have been best developed, and the one to be deciphered the most, is the Maya script. The earliest inscriptions which are identifiably Maya date to the 3rd century BC, and writing was in continuous use until shortly after the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century. Other surfaces used for early writing include wax-covered writing boards, sheets or strips of bark from trees, the thick palm-like leaves of a particular tree, the leaves then punctured with a hole and stacked together like the pages of a book, parchment, made of goat skin that had been soaked and scraped to remove hair, which was used from at least the 2nd century BC, vellum, made from calf skin, and wax tablets which could be wiped clean to provide a fresh surface. The Middle East. In what became Mesopotamia, the early logographic system of cuneiform script took many years to master. Thus only a limited number of individuals were hired as scribes to be trained in its reading and writing. Only royal offspring and sons of the rich and professionals such as scribes, physicians, and temple administrators were schooled. Most boys were taught their father's trade or were apprenticed to learn a trade. Girls stayed at home with their mothers to learn housekeeping and cooking, and to look after the younger children. Later, when a syllabic script became more widespread, more of the Mesopotamian population became literate. Later still in Babylonian times there were libraries in most towns and temples. An old Sumerian proverb averred that, he who would excel in the school of the scribes must rise with the dawn. There arose a whole social class of scribes, mostly employed in agriculture, but some as personal secretaries or lawyers. Women as well as men learned to read and write, and for the Semitic Babylonians, this involved knowledge of the extinct Sumerian language, and a complicated and extensive syllabary. Vocabularies, grammars, and interlinear translations were compiled for the use of students, as well as commentaries on the older texts and explanations of obscure words and phrases. The Epic of Gilgamesh, an epic poem from ancient Mesopotamia, is among the earliest known works of literary fiction. The earliest Sumerian versions of the epic date from as early as the 3rd dynasty of Ashurbanipal, a king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, was proud of his scribal education. His youthful scholarly pursuits included oil divination, mathematics, reading and writing, as well as the usual horsemanship, hunting, chariotry, soldierliness, craftsmanship, and royal decorum. During his reign he collected cuneiform texts from all over Mesopotamia, and especially Babylonia, in the library in Nineveh, the first systematically organized library in the ancient Middle East, which survives in part today. In ancient Egypt, literacy was concentrated among an educated elite of scribes. Only people from certain backgrounds were allowed to train to become scribes, in the service of temple, pharaonic, and military authorities. The hieroglyph system was always difficult to learn, but in later centuries was purposely made even more so, as this preserved the scribe's status. The rate of literacy in pharaonic Egypt during most periods from the 3rd to 1st millennium BC has been estimated at not more than 1%. Or between 0.5% and 1%. In ancient Israel, the Torah includes commands to read, learn, teach and write the Torah, thus requiring literacy and study. In 64 AD, the high priest caused schools to be opened. Emphasis was placed on developing good memory skills in addition to comprehension oral repetition. For details of the subjects taught, see History of Education in Ancient Israel and Judah. Although girls were not provided with formal education in the yeshiva, they were required to know a large part of the subject areas to prepare them to maintain the home after marriage, and to educate the children before the age of 7. Despite this schooling system, it would seem that many children did not learn to read and write, because it has been estimated that at least 90% of the Jewish population of Roman Palestine in the 1st centuries AD could merely write their own name or not write and read at all, or that the literacy rate was about 3%. Indian subcontinent in ancient India, during the Vedic period from about 1500 BC to 600 BC, most education was based on the Veda and later Hindu texts and scriptures. Vedic education included proper pronunciation and recitation of the Veda, the rules of sacrifice, grammar and derivation, composition, versification and meter, understanding of secrets of nature, reasoning including logic, the sciences, and the skills necessary for an occupation. Some medical knowledge existed and was taught. There is mention in the Veda of herbal medicines for various conditions or diseases, including fever, cough, baldness, snake bite and others. Education, at first freely available in Vedic society, became over time more discriminatory as the caste system, originally based on occupation, evolved, with the Brahmin being the most privileged of the castes. The oldest of the Upanishads, another part of Hindu scriptures, date from around 500 BC. These texts encouraged an exploratory learning process where teachers and students were co-travelers in a search for truth. The teaching methods used reasoning and questioning. Nothing was labeled as the final answer. The Gurukul system of education supported traditional Hindu residential schools of learning, typically the teacher's house or a monastery. Education was free, but students from well-to-do families paid Guru Dakshina, a voluntary contribution after the completion of their studies. At the Gurukuls, the teacher imparted knowledge of religion, scriptures, philosophy, literature, warfare, statecraft, medicine, astrology and history. The corpus of Sanskrit literature encompasses a rich tradition of poetry and drama as well as technical, scientific, philosophical and generally Hindu religious texts, though many central texts of Buddhism and Jainism have also been composed in Sanskrit. 2 epic poems formed part of ancient Indian education. The Mahabharata, part of which may date back to the 8th century BC, discusses human goals, attempting to explain the relationship of the individual to society and the world and the workings of karma. The other epic poem, Ramayana, is shorter, although it has 24,000 verses. It is thought to have been compiled between about 400 BC and 200 AD. The epic explores themes of human existence and the concept of Dharma. An early center of learning in India, dating back to the 5th century BC, was Taxila, which taught the 3 Vedas and the 18 accomplishments. It was an important Vedic, Hindu and Buddhist center of learning from the 6th century BC to the 5th century AD, China during the Zhou dynasty. There were 5 national schools in the capital city, Pyongyang, and 4 other schools for the aristocrats and nobility, including Shangxiang. The schools mainly taught the 6 arts: rites, music, archery, charioteering, calligraphy, and mathematics. According to the Book of Rituals, at age 12, boys learned arts related to ritual and, when older, archery and chariot driving. Girls learned ritual, correct deportment, silk production and weaving. It was during the Zhou dynasty that the origins of native Chinese philosophy also developed. Confucius, founder of Confucianism, was a Chinese philosopher who made a great impact on later generations of Chinese and on the curriculum of the Chinese educational system for much of the following 2,000 years. Later, during the Qin dynasty, a hierarchy of officials was set up to provide central control over the outlying areas of the empire. To enter this hierarchy, both literacy and knowledge of the increasing body of philosophy was required. The content of the educational process was designed not to engender functionally specific skills but rather to produce morally enlightened and cultivated generalists. During the Han dynasty, boys were thought ready at age 7 to start learning basic skills in reading, writing and calculation. In 124 BC, the Emperor Wudi established the Imperial Academy, the curriculum of which was the 5 classics of Confucius. By the end of the Han dynasty, the academy enrolled more than 30,000 students, boys between the ages of 14 and 17 years. However, education through this period was a luxury. The 9-rank system was a civil service nomination system during the 3 kingdoms and the southern and northern dynasties in China. Theoretically, local government authorities were given the task of selecting talented candidates, then categorizing them into 9 grades depending on their abilities. In practice, however, only the rich and powerful would be selected. The 9-rank system was eventually superseded by the imperial examination system for the civil service in the Sui dynasty, Greece and Rome. Main articles: Education in ancient Greece, education in ancient Rome. In the city-states of ancient Greece, most education was private, except in Sparta. For example, in Athens, during the 5th and 4th century BC, aside from 2 years military training, the state played little part in schooling. Anyone could open a school and decide the curriculum. Parents could choose a school offering the subjects they wanted their children to learn, at a monthly fee they could afford. Most parents, even the poor, sent their sons to schools for at least a few years, and if they could afford it, from around the age of 7 until 14, learning gymnastics, music and literacy. Girls rarely received formal education. At writing school, the youngest students learned the alphabet by song, then later by copying the shapes of letters with a stylus on a waxed wooden tablet. After some schooling, the sons of poor or middle-class families often learned to trade by apprenticeship, whether with their father or another tradesman. By around 350 BC, it was common for children at schools in Athens to also study various arts such as drawing, painting, and sculpture. The richest students continued their education by studying with sophists, from whom they could learn subjects such as rhetoric, mathematics, geography, natural history, politics, and logic. Some of Athens' greatest schools of higher education included the Lyceum and the Platonic Academy. The education system of the wealthy ancient Greeks is also called paideia. In the subsequent Roman Empire, Greek was the primary language of science. Advanced scientific research and teaching was mainly carried on in the Hellenistic side of the Roman Empire, in Greek. The education system in the Greek city-state of Sparta was entirely different, designed to create warriors with complete obedience, courage, and physical perfection. At the age of 7, boys were taken away from their homes to live in school dormitories or military barracks. There they were taught sports, endurance and fighting, and little else, with harsh discipline. Most of the population was illiterate. The first schools in ancient Rome arose by the middle of the 4th century BC. These schools were concerned with the basic socialization and rudimentary education of young Roman children. The literacy rate in the 3rd century BC has been estimated as around 1% to 2%. There are very few primary sources or accounts of Roman educational process until the 2nd century BC, during which there was a proliferation of private schools in Rome. At the height of the Roman Republic and later the Roman Empire, the Roman educational system gradually found its final form. Formal schools were established, which served paying students. Normally, both boys and girls were educated, though not necessarily together. In a system much like the one that predominates in the modern world, the Roman education system that developed arranged schools in tiers. The educator Quintilian recognized the importance of starting education as early as possible, noting that memory not only exists even in small children, but is especially retentive at that age. A Roman student would progress through schools just as a student today might go from elementary school to middle school, then to high school, and finally college. Progression depended more on ability than age, with great emphasis being placed upon a student's ingenium or inborn gift for learning, and a more tacit emphasis on a student's ability to afford high-level education. Only the Roman elite would expect a complete formal education. A tradesman or farmer would expect to pick up most of his vocational skills on the job. Higher education in Rome was more of a status symbol than a practical concern. It has been argued that literacy rates in the Greco-Roman world were seldom more than 20%, averaging perhaps not much above 10% in the Roman Empire, though with wide regional variations, probably never rising above 5% in the western provinces, and that illiterate in classical Greece did not much exceed 5% of the population. The argument for these claims is that ancient governments did not invest in public education.